All-conference linebacker Marlowe Wax is going to be out for a few weeks for Syracuse football. How do they replace him?
You are Locked On Syracuse, your daily podcast on the Syracuse Orange. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome into Locked On Syracuse. I'm Jackson Holzer, and thank you for making us your first listen of every single day here on the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day, and we're free and available wherever you get your podcasts. And on today's show, we're going to talk more about the Marlowe Wax injury because we have an update from Fran Brown. He says that Wax is going to be out for a few weeks, so we're going to discuss how the Orange can replace him. Plus, we're going to talk about Dan Villari's usage, or really lack thereof. He had no catches, no rushing attempts. How can Syracuse get Dan Villari involved more in the offense? And then we're going to take an early look at Georgia Tech. And spoiler alert, they like to run the football. So Syracuse football, who struggled to stop the run against Ohio, is going to have to do a much better job against even tougher competition against Georgia Tech next Saturday. This episode is brought to you by 5 Hour Energy. 5 Hour Energy fixes tired fast with zero sugar and a convenient portable size. It's the perfect pick-me-up for getting stuff done. Go to 5hourenergy.com and use promo code LOCKEDONCFB to receive 20% off your order. This offer is only valid until September 30th on one order and cannot be used with other promotions. Go to 5hourenergy.com today. So, in Syracuse's 38-22 victory over Ohio, late in the third quarter, Marlowe Wax suffered a lower body injury on his right side. I don't know if it was a foot, a knee, an ankle, a leg, whatever it is. He left the game late in the third quarter. He was seen wearing a boot, using crutches, did not return, obviously. And Fran Brown said post-game that Marlowe Wax will be out for at least a few weeks. This is obviously a huge loss for Syracuse because Marlowe Wax, for the past 2 seasons, has been an All-ACC linebacker. All right, he was an honorable mention in 2022, and then in 2023, he gets even better and was all-conference second team. And going into this season, he was on the preseason All-ACC squad, which, by the way, is only one team. They only released one preseason team, and Marlowe Wax made the cut. He is not only the best linebacker on Syracuse, he's the best defender on Syracuse. And not only that, he is one of the best defenders in the ACC. This is a big deal for Syracuse football, losing him for a few weeks. Obviously, nobody wants injuries, all right? We don't want injuries, but it is so unfortunate that it just so happened that the injury god struck down Marlowe Wax because he's a team captain, he's a leader, on top of being a really, really good player. So how does Syracuse football recover? How do they replace Marlowe Wax? Because the reality is there are going to be injuries. It's just the nature of the business. It's the nature of the sport. Injuries happen to every single team. Star players are going to get hurt. It happens. How do you replace them? Well, Syracuse has James Hurd, 6'2", 228 pounds, a redshirt freshman from New Jersey, a 3-star transfer this offseason, and a former 3-star recruit. Now, they are giving up a little bit of size as well as experience with James Hurd. James Hurd is 6'2", 228. Marlowe Wax is 6'1", 236. So it's not an overwhelming amount of size, but they are giving up a little bit. Like I said, he played 3 games at West Virginia last season, and he didn't record a single stat, but a true freshman. So it's okay for a true freshman to not see the field, even though Syracuse has a number of true freshmen that were on the field yesterday. James Hurd, in his limited action since the Marlowe Wax injury, recorded 1 tackle. He also had the interception in the fourth quarter that was on a batted ball. So right place, right time for James Hurd there. And that batted ball, by the way, came from Murad Watson, a true freshman, a 3-star recruit who graded really well, by the way, by Pro Football Focus. So a little bit of a surprise that Murad Watson, a 3-star recruit, a true freshman, played pretty well on that defensive line. Maybe one of the lone bright spots on that defensive line. Hopefully he sees the field more against Georgia Tech on Saturday, but I digress. Is James Hurd Marlowe Wax? He is not. You're not going to really just find an all-conference linebacker as your backup, right? If James Hurd is an all-ACC linebacker this season or plays like one in the absence of Marlowe Wax, obviously that would be terrific. But to expect that from James Hurd, I think, is a little bit unfair. The question is, can he do a serviceable job? I think he can. And Syracuse is going to have to rely on James Hurd. Okay, now he is one of the big pieces on this team, like it or not, because he is replacing Marlowe Wax, an experienced player who is really good, who, by the way, is incredibly smart. If you saw on the broadcast pointed out that Marlowe Wax would see a play coming. Now, whether or not Syracuse executed it and followed his lead is another story. But Marlowe Wax could point out the play that Ohio was going to run. And when you know what's coming, when you have a linebacker that can figure out what is happening, obviously that's going to help your team. Now, whether or not it works, well, that's on the execution aspect, but he's incredibly smart. He's experienced, an all-ACC linebacker the last 2 years. Does James Hurd have that resume? He does not. But I think he can do a serviceable job. I'm not going to sit here and say he's a Marlowe Wax 1-for-1 replacement, but it's a next man up mentality with a guy like James Hurd. I think he can do a serviceable job. He had a nice tackle. He did have that interception. It was on a batted ball, but again, right place at the right time, good things happen. It wasn't like he created the turnover. That was Murad Watson with the deflection. But he was in the right spot and gave himself the chance that if there was a deflection, he could pick the ball off, which is what he did. So once again, Marlowe Wax is going to be out for the foreseeable future. Fran Brown said that it's going to be a few weeks. James Hurd is the replacement for Marlowe Wax, a redshirt freshman transfer from West Virginia. Now, I do have some good news. If he's out for a few weeks, he might only be out for 2 games as far as a timetable for this injury. I don't know what the injury exactly is, but as far as a timetable, they play Georgia Tech on Saturday. And then after that, there's a bye week. And I believe they have 13 days between Georgia Tech and Stanford. And by the way, you don't need to rush Marlowe Wax back for Stanford. I think Syracuse can beat Stanford without Marlowe Wax. And then after that, you have Holy Cross. So you should be able to beat Holy Cross fairly easily without Marlowe Wax. So it's not doom and gloom. It would have been great if Marlowe Wax could play next week against Georgia Tech. In all likelihood, he won't. But then there's a bye week. Maybe Wax can recover and play for Stanford. If he can't, Syracuse should still be able to win with James Hurd in the lineup against Stanford. And then Syracuse plays Holy Cross the following week. They should have no trouble against Holy Cross with James Hurd in the lineup. And by the way, I am not going to chalk up Saturday as now an automatic loss without Marlowe Wax. I still think that Syracuse can beat Georgia Tech without Marlowe Wax with James Hurd in the lineup because I believe he can do a serviceable job in this game. It's a tough test. A team that likes to run the ball, it's going to be a tough test for James Hurd, but I believe he can rise to the occasion. Now, coming up, we're going to talk about Dan Villari's usage and how Syracuse can get the tight end more involved. Tired after lunch? You're not alone. In fact, research shows that more than 70% of us hit the wall after lunch. Let a 5-hour energy shot help you leap over that wall instead of crashing into it. With zero sugar and a convenient portable size, it's the perfect pick-me-up for getting stuff done. The 5-Hour Energy website has flavors galore like watermelon, tropical burst, grape berry, and more. There is a flavor for everyone. Try them all. On the site, you even have the option to build your own 12-pack or 24-pack. You choose the flavors and it is delivered right to your door. If you go to 5hourenergy.com, that is the number 5hourenergy.com, and get some 5-Hour Energy product today. You can use my promo code LOCKEDONCFB to receive 20% off your order. This offer is only valid until September 30th on one order and cannot be used with other promotions. The code is not good on subscription orders. Go to 5hourenergy.com today. Syracuse's offense was obviously really good yesterday. They put up 38 points on Ohio. They had almost 500 yards of total offense. I believe the exact number was 480. So it was a great start to the offense, and 8 different receivers caught a pass from Kyle McCord. So there was a lot of wealth that was spread, and that is a good sign. But one player who wasn't really involved in the offense much was Dan Villari, which is kind of curious. Dan Villari last season had 300 rushing yards, 180 receiving yards, and 6 total touchdowns. Dan Villari is a Swiss Army knife, if you recall. He is essentially the Taysom Hill of college football. But yesterday, he only played 25 snaps for Syracuse and did not record a single catch. He did not record a single rushing attempt. I don't even recall him even getting the ball thrown to him. I don't know if he had a target, but you can fact check me on that. Now, obviously, he wasn't a big part of the game plan against Ohio. It wasn't like Syracuse was trying to get the ball to Dan Villari and he just wasn't coming up with it. No, he really didn't get many opportunity. I don't think he got a single opportunity, like I just said. Now, I do want to give Dan Villari credit on this regard. Just because he didn't get a lot of opportunities doesn't mean that he didn't help the team win. If you recall, he had an excellent block on that 4th and goal play to Trevor Pena, which led directly to the touchdown. So shout out to Dan Villari for, yes, it's got to be a little bit frustrating to not get the ball, right? You're a tight end. You want the ball a little bit, especially with his usage at the end of last season when Garrett Schrader was hurt. But he still persevered and helped the team win with an excellent block for the Trevor Pena touchdown. Go watch that highlight again. Dan Villari had an excellent block right there. And obviously, Syracuse's offense still functioned plenty okay with Dan Villari not getting the ball at all. But at the same time, I would like to see Dan Villari more involved in the offense next week against Georgia Tech. Again, he is a Swiss Army knife. He was ACC running back of the week last year against Pitt. That's right. A tight end won running back of the week. And I understand his usage didn't really come until Garrett Schrader got hurt and was dealing with an injury while playing. But still, even with a guy like Kyle McCord, who can certainly air it out and is definitely the best quarterback that Syracuse has had in quite a long time. We saw it after just 1 week, and Ohio State fans with Will Howard, I don't know. I think they're trying to talk themselves into Will Howard being better, but I'm not so sure. He didn't look great against Akron. But anyways, Dan Villari needs to get more involved, even with Kyle McCord. And it's not on Dan Villari, it's on Jeff Nixon and the offense using him more. And the reason why I want him used more is because he adds a different dimension to the team, right? Imagine Kyle McCord in the shotgun with Dan Villari to one of his sides, either his left side or his right side, it doesn't matter. A defense has to respect the trickery. We didn't see any trickery really against Ohio. Did you recall any trick plays against Ohio? Now, maybe it's one of those things where Syracuse doesn't want to show their hand on offense. They're playing an inferior competition. They got Georgia Tech coming next week, and then they got Stanford, who, yeah, they should beat Stanford, but that's still a conference game. Maybe they don't want to tip their hand. But Dan Villari is the perfect player to use for that trick play element. Remember, he was a 4-star quarterback recruit at Michigan before transferring to Syracuse a couple of years ago. He's not a great throw. He's not a Division I thrower of the football. But if you're asking yourselves, who is a guy who can throw the ball on offense that isn't a quarterback, it is Dan Villari, because he is a former quarterback. He has that ability. He can throw it. He can run it. He can obviously catch it as a tight end. So I would like to see Syracuse use him more next week against Georgia Tech, because I think a trick play or two could really help this team. I think while the offense was really good, I'm not going to complain about nearly 500 yards. I did find it to be a little bit simplistic. And now sometimes simple can be good. There is that saying, it's KISS. KISS. Keep it simple, stupid. Right? There is that saying out there. But Dan Villari is the guy to use, especially for trick plays, because he can do so much with the ball. If you snap it to him, he could throw it. He can run it. I don't know what he's going to do if he gets the ball in his hands. Now, I did see something on Twitter, and it was a really good point about with Oronde Gadsden back and obviously Trevor Pena's emergence, and we're going to talk about Trevor Pena on a mini podcast tomorrow, that they kind of take away from Dan Villari as a tight end, because Gadsden occupies the middle of the field. Pena occupies the middle of the field. You don't need Dan Villari anymore running routes in the middle of the field, but you can use him next to Kyle McCord. You can use him in a Wildcat setting because he does have the ability to throw the ball at least at a respectable level, right? Remember this might be a little bit old. This is a long time ago. It was the 2009 or maybe 2008 Dolphins. The 2008 Dolphins with Ricky Williams and Ronnie Brown and the Wildcat. I'm not saying that Syracuse should run a Wildcat offense with Dan Villari, but what they should do is take a little bit of that element and apply to what they have right now. And one thing that offense didn't have, that Miami offense in 2008, Ricky Williams isn't a thrower of the football. Ronnie Brown is not a thrower of the football. Dan Villari can throw it a little. So I want to see Syracuse use Dan Villari a little bit more. And by a little bit, I mean actually get him the ball next week against Georgia Tech. Obviously, once again, Syracuse's offense was terrific yesterday. Kyle McCord spread the ball to 8 different receivers. Okay, it wasn't him just locking into Oronde Gadsden for 15 catches and nobody else did anything. It wasn't even just LaQuinn Allen who was running the ball. Yassine Willis got some touches. Will Nixon got some touches out of the backfield. Dan Villari, though, is someone that I think this team should use going forward. I'm just nitpicking here. The offense was great, but I think we can all agree that we want to see Dan Villari more against Georgia Tech. Now, coming up, we're going to talk a little bit about Georgia Tech because they like to run the ball, and Syracuse is going to have to be able to stop the run. Hey, Locked On Syracuse fans, I want to take a moment to give you a heads up on a brand new mobile game that I think you're going to love as much as I do, Ultimate College Football HC. In this amazing game and simulation, you get to step into the shoes of a head coach and lead your college football program to glory. Can you imagine actually being the head coach of Syracuse, from recruiting players and hiring coaching staff to overseeing training camps and handling school scholarships? You control every crucial detail of your program. It's all in your hands. Will you be able to handle the pressure? And here's what I really love about the game. You are responsible for calling offensive plays during the games. Your strategy will not only determine the success of your football season, but will shape the future and legacy of your program. Ultimate College Football HC is completely free, has no ads, and is 100% playable offline. You can play on the go as you want and when you want to. And of course, we have a special offer for Locked On Syracuse fans. Use the promo code LOCKEDONCFB in all caps inside the game store to receive a free boost to your program. Make sure to take advantage of this perk as it will get your team off to a strong start. To download the game, just visit ultimate-cfb.com or look it up on the app stores. Ultimate College Football HC. Begin your coaching legacy today. So Syracuse beat Ohio 38-22 yesterday. The offense was great. The defense, not so much. And with Georgia Tech coming to the Dome this Saturday, it's going to be a tough one. Now, Vegas has Georgia Tech favored. Don't come at me. Don't come at me. I'm just the messenger. Georgia Tech opens as a 2.5-point favorite for Saturday's noon kickoff against Syracuse. So the Orange are a home underdog. All right. Now, Georgia Tech. What about Georgia Tech do you need to know? Just an early look, all right? We're not going to go too deep into Georgia Tech because we got all week for that. The game is next Saturday. The Yellow Jackets had a 3-point win over a favored Florida State team in Ireland in week 0. They won, and then they took down Georgia State, their in-state rival, 35-12 yesterday. Now, I didn't really watch the game against Georgia State. Sorry, I didn't watch it. They were going to beat Georgia State, right? I didn't watch that game. But I did watch the game against Florida State. If you recall, or if you missed that game, let me tell you a little bit about Georgia Tech and what they did to Florida State. A team that a lot of people had high hopes for, a team that a lot of people thought could make the college football playoff, and one of the favorites in the ACC. Georgia Tech rammed the ball right down their throat. That's what they did. They ran the ball exceptionally well. Through 2 weeks, Georgia Tech, as a team, has accumulated over 400 yards of rushing. So an average of over 200 rushing yards a game. And one of those opponents was Florida State. It's easy to have 200 yards against a team like Georgia State or any group of 5, any FCS team, whatever it is. Against inferior competition, yeah, you're going to have, your stats are going to be maybe a little inflated. That's normal. They had over or nearly 200 yards alone against Florida State, who has or claims to have one of the best defensive lines in college football. Now, who leads the Yellow Jackets? Well, first and foremost, their quarterback. Let's talk about Haynes, who is 6'3", 215 pounds. He is not a small dude by any means. He has over 90 yards rushing in 2 weeks. And last season, he had over 700 yards on the ground, including over 80 against Syracuse when they met last year. So Haynes, he's bigger, he's stronger, and he's tough to bring down. So that's going to be a tough matchup for Syracuse. Then you got Jamal Haynes, the running back. Now, Jamal Haynes, I talked a little bit about at the end of yesterday's podcast. Haynes is 5'9", 175 pounds. So he is nowhere near the same size as a guy like Anthony Tyus for Ohio, who was 6'1", 226. All right. And I compared it yesterday to going against a bull to going against now a cheetah. Jamal Haynes is really, really fast, and he is averaging nearly 6 yards per carry to begin this season. He is one of the better running backs in the conference. I say all that to say that Syracuse is obviously going to have to clean up its run defense if they're going to beat a team like Georgia Tech. Now, do I think they can stop Georgia Tech? No. I don't think they can just outright stop their rushing attack. They just have to do a good enough job. Can they hold Georgia Tech under 150 yards? That's a lot already. But if they can hold Georgia Tech over 150, keep Haynes in the pocket as best they can, then Syracuse is going to have a good chance of winning the game. 150 yards is a lot of rushing yards. You just don't want to see it get up to 200. Because that's where you're in real trouble. If you keep it to 150 or less, you have a decent shot at winning the game. Now, one of the areas where Syracuse struggled in was tackling. Obviously, we can get on the defensive line for the holes that were opened up by Ohio, but it was the tackling on the next level that really had me irked that has to be cleaned up. I know I keep talking about Anthony Tyus' 44-yard run in the second quarter of yesterday's game, but it actually really encapsulates everything that went wrong with the rushing defense yesterday. Everything. If you recall, obviously there's a big hole, first of all, for Anthony Tyus to run through. So already he's getting 10 yards. That's not good enough. You can't allow 10 yards on every single run play. That's not good, right? But then he makes a couple of defenders miss. And if you recall, or if you look back on how they missed those tackles, it was Marcellus Barnes and Deuce Chestnut. They weren't wrapping up Anthony Tyus. Too oftentimes, it's not just those two. It was just the example of this run. Syracuse was diving. They were trying to make dive tackles and essentially trying to trip up the running back. Now, maybe it's because of his size, the fact that he was 6'1", 225. So how are they going to handle a guy like Jamal Haynes, who is much shiftier and faster, but not as big? So you might be able to get in front of him. But the point being, instead of making those dive tackles, what Syracuse has to do on that next level, especially, get in front of the ball carrier and wrap him up and bring him to the ground. Okay, no more dive tackles. No more trying to dive at the player's legs, because all the running back has to do is see it and then time it right to where he can essentially just jump over the arm tackle, because that's what it becomes. When you're diving at a guy's legs, you're making an arm tackle. Stay in front of him and wrap him up, or at least slow him down so that help can come. With a guy like Jamal Haynes, I think it actually fares more favorably for Syracuse because he's not as big as Anthony Tyus. Now, on the flip side, for Georgia Tech, they haven't faced a quarterback like Kyle McCord through these 2 weeks. They have not. And yes, that is me poking fun, or me making, I am poking fun at Florida State and DJU. I don't think DJU is good at all. Okay? He did not play well against Georgia Tech, and I think that's more of an indictment on Florida State and their offense. I think that Syracuse has a better offense right now than Florida State. So how is Georgia Tech going to handle Syracuse's passing attack? That's the matchup that maybe goes in favor of us. Also, Georgia Tech's front is going to be better than Ohio's, but the offensive line for Syracuse was a pleasant surprise against Ohio. I don't really recall too often when Kyle McCord faced any real pressure. And when he did feel pressure, it was after the threshold of about 2.5 seconds. Once it's been 2.5 seconds, the quarterback has got to get rid of the ball, because you can't expect your offensive line to hold up for that long. I don't recall Kyle McCord really having that much pressure within 2.5 seconds of getting the snap. So that was good on the offensive line for Syracuse. How are they going to handle a tougher matchup against the Georgia Tech front, who, by the way, I didn't watch the game against Georgia State. They did give up 360 total yards against Georgia State. That's a little bit weird. They gave up 360 total yards. They won 35-12. Regardless, it's going to be a fun contest. Syracuse is a slight underdog in this game. This is the first true test of the Fran Brown era. I hope they can pass it. And if I had to give an early prediction, I do think that Syracuse is going to find a way to win this game. Thank you for making Locked On Syracuse your first listen today. Now go check out the Locked On College Football Podcast, from NIL deals to never-ending conference realignment rumors. Spencer McLaughlin gets you ready for an exciting season on the gridiron. You can find the link to Locked On College Football in the description, so you don't need to search. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Now, as far as future plans for the podcast, I did release on Twitter, which is at @LO_Syracuse, and on the YouTube community section, the full list of programming, what I'm doing today, obviously, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. So just a little quick overview. We have a mini podcast about Trevor Pena coming tomorrow, so stay tuned for that. Just a mini one. It's going to be about 10 to 15 minutes long on Trevor Pena and having 3 touchdowns and how he changes the complexion of the offense. Then Tuesday and Wednesday, we're going to have a couple of guests. We got Neil Adler from Inside the Loud House and Mike McAllister, a publisher for 24/7 Sports, so stay tuned for that. Obviously, Thursday, then we're going to have a full podcast, and then Friday is Poll Friday. And if you have any suggestions for what the Poll Friday question should be, leave a comment in the comment section below, your ideas for Poll Friday. I have a couple of them in my head that I'm thinking about, but I want to hear what you guys have to say. So that is it for today's podcast. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. If you like this video, click that like button. And if you really liked it, subscribe to the channel and turn on those notifications so you know right away when I am dropping the next podcast. And everyone, take care.